Welcome everybody to the August photo critique. So I've got a couple things going on here this time. I've combined a couple of things. So normally I invite people on my email list who get my articles and videos and stuff to go ahead and submit a couple of photos. So I've got those photos in here. But then I've also got a couple of students from a class that I recently did. So when it gets to their photos, I'm going to talk about things from the perspective of what we discussed in class and, kind of help refresh their memory on all those sorts of things. So I think we'll have a pretty good mix here of a little bit of editing and some composition stuff, creative stuff and camera settings and a whole bunch of good things. So I'm pretty excited to do this. Often I do these videos for a single person. They've done like a personal one-on-one photography class with me, and then they send in 20 or 30 photos or something like that, and I get to look at just one person's photos. And it's really great because of the patterns that I see and the difficulties that I can help them through. So there are fewer photos from each person here, but that's okay because again, we can start to see, we can learn a lot by looking at different people's photos. So let me see here. I'm not entirely sure. Let me start with the two students. And so these people were local to me, whereas the other people who sent in photos, they could be from anywhere in the world. So in these photos here, one of the things that we were discussing in class, or I guess the three main things that we talked about in class was ISO. And so first I explained ISO without all the overwhelming detail. I basically, in a nutshell, said that ISO just lets your camera know what kind of light you're in so that it can have like appropriate sensitivity to the light. Have you ever been asleep at night and then somebody turns on a light or a lamp or something like that and it just feels like your eyes are being burnt out of their sockets? Well, you don't want to do that to your camera. If you're going to put your camera in bright light, you want to set it for bright light so that it doesn't get shocked and you end up with this crazy overexposed photo because of what you did with the ISO. So I told them on a sunny day to set your ISO to 400, and any of you who are watching this who are more experienced, you might be freaking out that I told them to set their ISO for 400 on a sunny day. You're thinking it should be on 100. And some of you are thinking it should never leave 100. It doesn't matter if you're in the pitch black, you should never leave 100. Well, I'm going to explain why in a minute. I tell them to start at 400. And then on an overcast day or in deep shade, you're probably going to want to go up to 1600. If it's getting really dim outside, like late evening or something, or you're indoors, you're going to be on 1600 or 3200, even 6400. And Sylvia went even higher in one of her photos. And so we'll take a look at that. So then I talked about aperture. And I showed them the aperture numbers, and I showed them numbers like f, let's just say 5.6. And I showed them f, we'll say 22. And I told them that the lower number will help you to get a blurry background. The lower the number you have, and I also told them that the higher number will keep things more in focus, or I should say focus instead of crisp. So that was basically what I explained to them. I just wanted them to know how to do these things with their camera and have a starting point. There were other things we talked about that we'll get into as we look at the photos. So instantly, in this first photo, we had a problem. So I'm looking at these photos in Lightroom, and I can see the camera settings. So I can see that Sylvia she had set her ISO to 360, which I'm just guessing that maybe she intended to set it for 400 and, the button slipped or something like that. It doesn't really matter. The difference between ISO 360 and 400 is not that big of a difference. So she's outside in the bright sunlight. We can see that from this photo. And she set it to 400, just like I said. And yet she has this blurry photo. And why is it blurry? Well, it's not blurry because she opened up her aperture, meaning she set her aperture to a small f number and got a nice blurry background. That's not what's going on here. The entire photo is blurry. So something went wrong with this photo, and the question is, what went wrong? Well, I can see, now, I did not teach the people in my class how to take control of their shutter speed. At least I don't think we covered it, because I find when I give people too many things in one single class, they don't remember it. They don't remember any of it. Whereas if I give them a couple things, then they remember it and they make mistakes, and then I help them correct the mistakes, and then they're ready to do more, to go deeper. So her shutter speed got really slow. And let me just say really quickly that the shutter, when you take a picture and you hear the click click, the shutter opens and it closes, and while it's open, it's recording the picture. Now, it's not recording a movie, it's just trying to capture one still frame. The problem is, if your shutter is open for a long time, whatever happens while it's open is going to get like smeared, well, it's going to get captured. And so if it opens and closes really quick, you're going to get a nice crisp photo, really quick shutter speed. So the time going by here is super fast. You get a nice crisp stick figure. Whereas if you have this slow shutter speed down here, your shutter's open for a long time. Let's suppose that stick figure is dancing. And so the stick figure is dancing, and arms are flailing and legs are akimbo, and all of that movement in the arms and legs gets smeared across the photo. And that's the kind of thing that we have going on in this photo. Now, there's two ways it can happen. One is you have a nice, steady hand, you're really still, maybe you even have your camera on a tripod, and the only thing that's blurry is the person that's moving. So let's pretend this picture was entirely crisp, and the only blur was the person moving. That happens a lot. But in this photo, the entire photo is blurry, and it's because the camera moved when you took the picture. So practice holding still. I know it's really tempting when you are photographing movement to move your camera along with it, and as you get better practiced, you'll be able to do that, and there's actually some neat creative effects that you can get with it. But at first, I think you really need to focus on having a steady hand. Keep that camera still. Now, what can you do here, though? Or why is there such a slow shutter speed? Because normally out in bright light, you should be able to get a nice, crisp photo. Something is wrong here. Now, what you did, Sylvia, is you closed your aperture, and I know why, because you were practicing. I told you to do this. I said, go for the lower aperture number sometimes, such as 5.6, and I said go for the higher numbers sometimes, such as 22 or 32 or even 16, and these numbers will help keep the background in focus, and this number here and the lower numbers will make the background go out of focus. And so she was experimenting. And this is why I make people experiment, because you're going to run into problems. She did the right thing with her ISO. And she did the right thing by experimenting and practicing and closing her aperture. But she had no control over shutter speed. And just really quick here, and we're going to go through these next photos a lot faster, but there's sort of a lot to unpack in this photo. So really quick, when your camera makes a picture, it's using light. Just like painters use paint, photographers, or the camera uses light to make the picture. And there are three different ways that light comes into the camera or interacts with the camera when the picture is being made. One of them is ISO, and it's how sensitive your camera is to the light. One of them is aperture, and that's basically how big of a hole or how big of a tunnel there is in your lens, how much light can go gushing through. Is it going to be a trickle of light, or is it going to be a flood of light? And then the last thing is shutter speed, which is measured in fractions of a second. That's why it says 1/60th, 1/60. And that's a really slow shutter speed. And something that would have been better for this scene is more like 1/1000th of a second. Picture you're taking 1 second, you're chopping it into 1,000 microscopic pieces, and then one of those pieces is how quickly your shutter opens and closes. That would have basically frozen the movement here in this photo. Now, Sylvia, you're in aperture mode, and so you have no control over your shutter speed. And so the question is, well, what in the world can you do? Well, to get a faster shutter speed when you don't have control, so this is too slow, you want this kind of shutter speed. How do you do it? Well, you need to get more light into the camera. So think about this principle. You're outside on a bright sunny day, you set your ISO to 400 or something close to it, so that's good. And then you say to yourself, I am going to be capturing a fast-moving object. I don't have control over my shutter speed, but I need to feed my camera lots of light so that my shutter speed will be really fast. It needs to be a fast shutter speed like this, open, close, instead of a slow shutter speed like this, open, close. That's too much time for movement and blur. So the way to do it, the way to feed your camera more light, is open your aperture. Don't close your aperture. I know you were experimenting, so it's not like you did anything wrong. You see what happens. You closed your aperture so much, you went for such a high number, you're choking out so much light. Yes, this would have been great for keeping the background in focus, theoretically, but not when your entire photo gets blurry. So just think to yourself, when I'm capturing motion, I need to feed my camera lots of light so that it will go with a quick shutter speed. And the main way is to open up your aperture, go with a smaller aperture number. That's going to let a lot more light into the camera. Aperture is partially about your background being in focus or not, and it's partially about light. So anyways, so experiment more with that. Get somebody diving into the pool again, and choose different camera settings. Go with ISO 400 and go with an aperture of 5.6, and I think you're going to get a very different looking photo. All right, this one here. Okay, so now Sylvia has opened her aperture up. It's at 5.6, so, and she is zoomed in, so that's the most she can open her aperture. She's at ISO 400, just like I told her. And right now, somebody watching this video is cringing and banging their head against the wall, because why in the world would this crazy Mac guy tell people to go to ISO 400? It is a sin. Well, I completely disagree, and because one of the things that newer and newer cameras are giving us is the ability to shoot with higher ISO numbers and not have the problems that ISO used to give us. We are going to look at ISO problem in a second. So yes, back in the day, you didn't want to put your camera over ISO 100, because if you went to 200, 400, or 800, you would get this disgusting looking grain in your photo. But that just isn't really happening anymore. And we saw what happened with the swimming photo, that even at ISO 400, there wasn't enough light. So 400 I have found is a safer starting point for my students. And as they understand more and more, they can make their own decisions about ISO. But they run into a lot fewer problems. Now, I would say that there was, so I'm just going to guess here that this photo was an accident. It was a mistake. Like, the face is out of focus, but what we have in focus is some strands of hair. And I think what happened is the wind was blowing, and the camera just happened to focus on the hair instead of the face, like instead of the glasses or something like that. And so then we end up with the hair in focus, and everything behind the hair is out of focus. You can really see what happens when you open your aperture up, meaning you go to the lowest number you can, and you zoom in as much as you can really blow your backgrounds out of focus, which can look really nice. And I think in this picture, there was just a mistake with the focusing. And so I always try and take 2 or 3 shots of the same thing, because I'm worried about a misfocus with my camera. When I only take 1 shot, man, like, too many times it's out of focus. So I try and take 2 or 3 shots to make sure I've got at least one of them in focus. But you can see the principles at work here of getting the background out of focus by opening your aperture and by zooming in. And then here we go. I would say this is the same kind of photo. Now she's not zoomed in as much, but still somewhat zoomed in. And zooming in with your lens will help the background to become more out of focus. And so then we can see here that basically the part of the photo that's in focus is the eye. You can see the eyelash there and the cheek. And then the hair is out of focus and the peach is out of focus, or whatever it is. I think it's a peach. And yeah, so, you know, and if you're just practicing, you were just trying to get a nice out of focus background, you got it. And I would say you basically, given the fact that you're kind of to the side of the person, kind of over their shoulder, I would say, you know, you got a pretty decent, you focused on the right spot. It'd be weird if the ear was in focus and the eye was out of focus. That would just be hard. We don't really want to look at the ear. People have ears and they're there, but usually we're focused on, we look people in the eye, not look them in the ear. So this is good. It's good focus there. And okay, now in this photo, I can see that, Sylvia, you have closed your aperture somewhat. So you are now at f16. And you can see how the background it's not perfectly in focus, but it's a lot more in focus than it was in the last photo, where you almost couldn't tell what the background was, except for the context of the other photos. So this is also kind of a tricky lighting situation. And it's tricky because you have the person's face in dark shadow, and then you've got a white hat which is reflecting the sun and is super bright. So you actually have a fairly well exposed photo here. Now, I did show the people in the class the magic plus minus button on the camera, or exposure compensation as it's technically called. But I prefer plus minus because when I'm taking pictures, I don't want to kill I don't want to fill my brain space with technical terms. I understand the technical terms, but it's a lot easier to think brighter, darker, plus, minus, than it is for me to think hum and ha over exposure compensation and exposure triangles and stuff. I understand that stuff, but I don't want to think technically. I want to think creatively, but I still have to engage the technical side. So I showed them that button, and I've got videos on that. And so if you found yourself in a situation where, let's suppose the original photo looked more like this. There we go. There was just a bit of a delay there. So it looked more like this. You'd look at this and probably feel like it was too dark. The hat is okay, sort of. It's still actually a little bit too bright, but they're in dark shadow. And so if your first picture was like this is how the picture naturally came out, then I showed the people in class to go to use that plus minus button and go to +1 or +2 so that the dark part of your photo gets brighter. Now the downside is the whole photo gets brighter. And so, you know, you end up with, you know, with a photo like this where the face looks good, it's not too dark anymore, but maybe the hat is a little bit too bright. Now it's not that big of a deal because it's a white hat anyways, and I don't really find it all that distracting in this photo. But one thing that you can do is with editing, you can use this slider over here. So I'm in Lightroom, although most editing programs have a slider like this. And notice that with the exposure slider, I'm brightening or darkening the entire photo. But with highlights, all I'm doing is brightening or darkening the brightest parts of the photo. It's only the hat and some of the brighter skin. And so I can drag that down a little bit to darken the hat a bit, except the hat has kind of actually gone completely overexposed. And I think that this is a good thing to point out here. So if we zoom in on the hat, notice that part of the hat still has a little bit of detail left to it over here. There is this gray area, and then this section over here, there is some gray in there, but a lot of it, of course, is white. But then over here, it's pure white. This has become so overexposed, there's no detail left, there's nothing. It's just whiteness burned into your camera, and there's nothing you can do to get that back. This part of the hat up here, we can still make some adjustments in terms of brightening or darkening it, but part of the hat, most of the hat, has become way too overexposed. Watch the top left corner of the hat and notice that I can adjust it. I can brighten it up, I can darken it, but most of the rest of the hat is just so overexposed. So it's not a big deal though. I don't think this picture is about the hat. I suspect that this portrait is more about the person in the portrait than it is about the exact hat that they're wearing. But just know that white t-shirts and things like that can wreak a lot of havoc in your photos. They can get overexposed really quickly. I really like this shot. You know, shooting through the grass or whatever it is, I think is a neat perspective. Now, I felt like the photo was a little bit dark, and so I just brightened it up a little bit like that. So my editing philosophy is this. You are either you're taking a photo that did not work and you're trying to make it work, or you're just trying to put the finishing touches on your photo. I think this photo worked, and you're not trying to rescue it, you're just trying to put the finishing touches on it. And I thought just a little bit brighter would be nice. I would even go maybe a little bit brighter still, especially if you were going to print this, because on a screen things can look really nice, and then when you print it, it's not nearly so bright, it's really dull. So I tend to push the brightness of my photos as much as I can, so that if they get printed, they're still going to look nice and bright in print. Okay, and all right, so yes, basically, you know, she opened her aperture up and zoomed in, and that got you know, the foreground to be out of focus, and the water in the background too. Now she's all the way up at ISO 4000 because Sylvia, you were in really dim light, and you realized you had to bump up your ISO. If your ISO had been way down at like 1600 or 800, you would have had the same problem with shutter speed. As it is, you were feeding your camera lots of light by opening your aperture, going for that smaller number. Opening the aperture means more light comes in, and a high ISO makes your camera more sensitive to the light that's there, and then it allowed you to get a pretty decent shutter speed. You know, not quick enough for capturing really fast action, but definitely quick enough for capturing still light. So that was good. You would have ended up with a lot slower shutter speed had you had a lot lower ISO. So this is good. Now I know right now, again, somebody's freaking out, like how can you go to ISO 4000? Because when we zoom in here, notice how speckly it is, how grainy it is. This is called noise. In film, it might have been referred to as grain. In digital photography, we call it noise. And it's basically like little green and purple speckles and graininess. Now you can work toward getting rid of this. You go down to noise reduction and watch the color basically disappear. It's still grainy, but the color just left. I'll bring the color back now, and you can see it there, and then I'll take the color away. And then we can soften the graininess with the luminance slider. Now the problem is when you reduce the noise, you are softening your photo a bit, but in Lightroom, I love to go and add, I'm being extreme here, I don't always take my sliders all the way up or all the way down. But I figure let's bring back a bunch of texture in the photo. And of course, when you bring back a little texture, it kind of brings back the graininess a little bit. I don't have a big problem with grain. It just doesn't bother me that much. I would rather get the shot than not get the shot. If you hate grain, you've got to keep your ISO lower. I would say don't break 3200, and if possible, don't break 1600. And if possible, don't break 400, you know, if you don't have to. But if you have to, my principle is this. Keep your ISO as low as you can, but take it as high as you have to get the shot. So don't let anybody tell you you can't go to ISO 6400. You can go to ISO 6400, and you'll have to live with the grainy consequences. And I don't think it's that big of a deal. And if it is, just don't do it. Now this is insane. This is ISO 12,800. And basically, again, Sylvia, I can see you've opened your aperture as much as you could. And I'm guessing this was either deeply overcast, and when we look at the puddle, we can actually see raindrops frozen there. But also because you're so high in your ISO, again, we see a lot of that noise. So we're going to go to our noise reduction. We're going to clean up the color a bit, and we're going to soften that grain. Of course, we're going to kind of bring some of the grain is going to come back when we bump up the texture, but boom, look at that. Like, I think that's nice. And while I would be tempted to brighten this photo, I kind of don't want to, because I feel as though the darkness is part of the mood. I think it was deeply overcast and raining, maybe even around a thunderstorm, deep dark clouds, and I just kind of think that that it suits this photo. So, one interesting thing though, and I don't know if this is going to be good. I'm just thinking, what if you were to, I'm using a brush here to brighten one of these lily pads. In fact, you could brighten all the lily pads with a brush. And that allows us, see, my gut instinct was to brighten the photo, but then I knew it wouldn't look good. I knew it would lose the mood. But what if we just brighten a couple lily pads? That, I think, makes the photo a bit stronger. There's some visual contrast. We got the dark water, we've got, and the dark, sort of neutral tone water, and then we've got the green and brighter lily pads. Okay, so Sylvia, keep practicing. Don't stop practicing. I don't know how you feel about your experience so far. If you're discouraged, do not be discouraged. You're out there experimenting. You know what to do. Your intuition is going in the right way. And you just, need to overcome these mistakes. Now, if there's a lot of movement, you got to feed your camera lots of light. So open up that aperture. And yes, you're going to get the odd misfocus, but you're going to get a great focus as well. And go ahead and keep experimenting with the aperture in terms of getting your background in focus, out of focus, and keep going for these really nice compositions and whatnot that you've got going on. Keep it up. And I would love to see more of your photos. So please send me some more. I really love to see people learn and grow. So I don't just want to see your first batch of photos. I want to see a handful more photos later on. Okay, we're going to go to Mercedes here. And these are some before photos. I asked her, I thought she did a really good job with her practice photos, and I asked her to send some photos from before. So, you can see that she's got a little one and that she loves to do portraits of little ones and maternity and that sort of thing. So these photos, for somebody who didn't know how to use her camera, and she didn't, and was just getting into photography and was just trying, there's nothing wrong with these photos. Now, I can look at them and I can think about what might make them better, but I'm not really going to critique these photos because this is before she learned anything. But what I do want you to see is what happened after she learned, and isn't this like night and day compared to what we just saw? Those photos we just saw were nice, but it looks as though we've got something even better here. And so basically, Mercedes, now you just know, the principles for getting an out of focus background. We talked a little bit about how to work with sunlight and shade, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in these photos. So starting off here, and let's see what the camera settings were. So okay, ISO 400, and she zoomed all the way into 200 millimeters, and she had her aperture open all the way at f2.8. So she's using a special lens. It's a 70 to 200. It's pretty popular. And when you zoom in, your aperture doesn't start to close. That's why she's not at aperture 5.6 like most people are when they zoom. She's at aperture 2.8. That's going to help the background to be more out of focus. Really quickly, here are the principles for getting an out of focus background. So first of all, open your aperture all the way. Go for the smallest number you can. That might be 1.8. If you've got a 50 millimeter lens, it might be 2.8. It might be 5.6. Get the lowest number you can. Then you want to zoom in as much as you can. So you might zoom in on your lens to 55 millimeters, and you might zoom into 200 or 300 or something like that, but zoom in as much as you can. You may be limited with where you're standing and how much room you have and everything, but zoom as much as you can. Also, get as close to your subject, the object that you're photographing. Get as close as you can. Again, you're still trying to achieve a certain you know, I'm not telling you to get so close that you're just getting a photo of their eyeball, or so close that you're only getting head and shoulders when you really want it head to toe. I'm saying get as close as you can, because far too often people just stand back. They shoot really wide, and they stand back, and then they wonder why they don't have that really nice out of focus background. Also, the further away your background is from your subject, so pull your subject up away from the background. So if this is a tree that you want out of focus, and you put your subject right against the tree, and then you're standing here with your camera shooting this way, the tree is still going to be in focus because they're so close to the tree. What you want to do is bring them way out here, and then you're standing here and you're shooting towards them this way. And now the tree will be a lot more out of focus. So that's the basic formula. And as many of those elements as you can get, opening your aperture, zooming in, getting close, bringing them away from the background. You can't necessarily do them all, but the more you can stack together, the more out of focus your background will be. Okay. All right, so this is really nice, like really nice soft light, and you know, we're not dealing with sun or anything here. And I think okay, so at least some of these are. So this is an edit, and this is not edited. So you can see that basically, you know, she's primarily, I think, just added a bit of contrast, which helps the people in the photo to pop a little bit more, and I think that was nice. Probably just a very simple edit, and I think it made a difference. So we've got, it looks like a pretty newish newborn here. All right, let's see. Again, nice soft light. I'm guessing, you know, by the light I can see that it's somewhat overcast, or at least somewhat hazy, because I'm not seeing any bright sunspots. And so that's helping these to look really nice. It would be nice, and now this can be hard to do, but it would be nice to get a little bit more light on the faces. And so see, like these faces are really bright here, and then these faces are a bit darker. And so my thought is that, yeah, if you can, wherever you've got them set up, like I'm assuming that they're somewhat in the shade. I don't know whether these people are all in much different places, but if possible, pull them out toward the light a little bit more. We talked about being putting people in the shade and bringing them right to the edge of the shade, so that they will be. So let's assume that we've got like this great big tree here, and it's casting some shade. That's all shady ground. If you put people deep in the shade, it's going to look really dim. So I always tell people, bring them out more toward the sunlight, but not in the sunlight. So over here is sunlight hitting the ground. Don't bring them into the sun, but bring them right close to the edge of the shade. And so you would be shooting into the shade, but you've got them right out at the edge of the shade, and that will light them up a bit more. And actually, you know what? Now that I've looked at this for a few more seconds, one thing that I'm seeing is that it's really bright on this side of his face, and then the rest of his face falls more into shadow. It's not deep dark shadow, but you can see that that there is bright light coming from this direction here. So I would say turn them that way if you can, as long as it's not direct sunlight. Turn them more toward that open, bright sky. But these are really nice pictures. I just, you know, I have to kind of, you know, it'll seem like I'm nitpicking a little bit, but it's the kind of thing that will take your photo to the next level. Again, I swear I'm seeing, you know, more brightness over here, and then, you know, the little guy or gal, whichever, is tucked away in there, so a little bit dark. So if you can sort of, but again, you know, nice photo anyways. It's not like it's that crazy dark or anything. And again, a good edit there. And a nice edit there. So yeah, your editing is pretty simple. You know, you just sort of, you know, there's a slight bit more brightness, a slight bit more contrast and vibrance and whatnot. So you're way better off keeping your editing subtle and doing as little as you can. Now, notice in this picture, unlike the rest of them, we now have catch lights in the eyes. Let me zoom in there. And so you can see that the sky is reflecting in her eyes. And so that can really help, getting these catch lights can really help bring a portrait to light, or to life, sorry. It really brings the eyes to life and really brings the portrait to life. So that's really nice. And I suspect, again, you've probably got her sitting right toward the edge of the shade, which is nice. It may be somewhat overcast as well. We may have a couple things going on. Okay, but now we get the sunlight in, and we get those sunspots, which can be difficult to work with. And so what I recommend is you try and avoid these sunspots, and you find, like, notice the shade all back in here. Well, for the most part, I think, from what I can see, is more consistent dark shade. So her feet are in the light and a little bit overexposed. Everything else is basically fine. So what I want to do is see if I can edit this photo a little bit. Again, I'm just going to use that highlight slider. And notice that really it's just the sunspots and her feet that's changing. And so that helps. Her feet are still a little bit bright. But it kind of works a bit with this photo that her feet are bright, because our eyes are drawn to things that are brighter. Also, our eyes are drawn to where people in photos are looking. So she's looking at her feet. So we're going to follow her eyes and see what she's looking at. And then her feet are bright, so we're going to look at her feet as well. So it's not necessarily all that bad that they're a little bit bright. But just in general, you want to avoid those sunspots. Get them a little bit deeper into the shade. And, the same here. It's like we're just starting to catch. The light is really, really diffused through the branches, but we are just starting to get some subtle shadows in around the faces. Still, really, really cute shot, but just basically, try and avoid those sunspots as much as possible. And, sometimes you can't. Like, I love candid stuff, candid photography. And if a person's moving around, roaming around, sometimes you're in less than ideal lighting situations. Here, I think, unfortunately, her leg has really become overexposed. We bring down that highlight slider, and her skin is still, watch when I darken the photo, how that skin doesn't really change. Like, it gets a little more dull, but like, you've completely overexposed that part of the photo, and you're never going to get that detail back. If it was just a tiny bit overexposed, you could get that detail back. So, a really good reason to stay out of those sunspots. And then we got some newborn photos here. So that's a really nice color and a really nice edit in those photos. Again, I can see sunspots here. I can see spots around his hand and, sort of hitting the dress and whatnot. But it's not that bad. It's pretty good. You're thinking right now, well, I can't really move the swing. Like, the swing is where the swing is. And that's totally fine. You're going to have situations where you can't avoid the sunspots. At least they are very subtle, and they're not really causing problems in the photo. But just now this one, we can see a lot of brightness in here around the shoulder. And so we can try our highlight slider and see what that's going to do. And it doesn't do a whole lot, and it makes some of the other parts of the photos a little bit dull. So, but again, it's not that bad in these photos. I'm only pointing it out as a good tip for people who, avoid it when you can, kind of thing. So shooting raw, which I'm not really going to get into right now. At some point, I'll record a video on it, and it will be. I promise you, it will be controversial as soon as you start talking about raw photos. And I promise you, I will take the controversial point of view. And it's going to make perfect sense. And it may be different controversy than you've heard. But shooting raw might have allowed you to rescue those overexposed highlighted parts And so, you know, that's something that you may want to consider learning about. Okay, so Mercedes, great job on these. I mean, basically, all your photos have an out of focus background. So just in these photos, you weren't necessarily practicing keeping the background in focus. I would encourage you to practice that because every once in a while it will be important. Good, you know, good job with the ISO. You weren't trying to capture any movement in these photos. Generally speaking, I would say you happen to have, you know, a decently fast shutter speed most of the time. So, but you may begin to run into problems once these little ones are running around, that, you know, you start to get some blurriness in your photos. So just keep in mind when that's happening, you need to feed your camera more light, and that's going to help. All right, and then let's go to the top of the list here with Glenn. And we're going to roll fairly quick through these photos. So first of all, these are beautiful photos, and just like they feel enchanted or magical or something like that. I love the mood of these photos, and I love this line here. So for everybody else listening, lines are great in photo because I feel like I'm just walking down this path, and it takes me around, and then it takes me into, I want to know what's around that corner. And with this bright light here, the lines pull me through the photo. I move through the photo. I move toward the light, and I want to know what's around that corner. So really good job with lines, with mystery, with making us want to move through your photo. And okay, so I'm going to go to the other photo first, and then I'll come back to this one, because I like to try and give people feedback that says, here's what I think is strong about your photo, and then here's what might make it stronger. And actually, this is a good example. So, sorry, I believe this is Glenn's photos. I'm going to double check that in a second. He went to f8, so he's closed his aperture somewhat, allowing more of this photo to be in focus, more of the foreground and the background to be in focus. And he's at ISO 100, and that was fine. So, I mean, you know, this seems like it's contradicting what I just told my students about being on ISO 400. But I'm assuming that Glenn knows what he's doing, and he said, no, I'm fine with ISO 100. His shutter speed was quick enough. He wasn't trying to capture movement, and you definitely want to be at the lowest ISO you can. But I think 400 is a good starting point until you're really comfortable with what you're doing. Again, love this photo. Now, and he's at f5.6, so the aperture is a little more open than before. But, you know, as I look around this photo, it's not like one thing is in focus and the rest is a total blur. I don't want to zoom in and nitpick and see if everything is tack sharp and everything. I'm just looking at this and going, okay, you know, I can look around, things are in focus. Again, I love the use of lines. We have this line here, and things trail off into the distance. We got a path here. Now, so, you know, my gut told me two things. One, I love the mood of this photo, but I also said, gee, it seems too dark. And I thought, well, what would brightening it do? And brightening it kills the photo. Like, look at the mood just disappear. It's just gone. It vanishes. And then I thought, okay, I swear this photo needs a bit more light, but how are we going to get it without brightening the entire photo? Because that kills it. I think this is great. And the question is just, what would make the photo that much better? Now I'm giving you my opinion here, my taste. You don't have to agree with me about this. And sorry, let me just double check. I want to make sure that these are, yes, Glenn's photos. So what I thought was, what if we took a brush and do the same kind of thing that I did with the lily pads? I actually got the lily pad idea from this photo, where I said, what if we brighten this path here? Oops, why is that going so slow? There we go. And I thought that allows us to brighten one thing in this photo and not lose the feel of the whole photo. Now, you can like this or not like it, and I just did that super quick. I wasn't being careful. I just brushed it in quickly to give you the feel for it. But I thought, now I can walk down that path, because before the path was dark and it was not inviting me into the photo, and I feel like it is now. And so totally fine if you don't like what I did with this, but I think it makes the photo stronger. I think it takes a photo that was just, I mean, honestly, I looked at your photos and I'm like, what can I say that could make these photos better? Like, there's nothing I could say. They're so cool to begin with. And then I thought, well, what if they were brighter? And then that didn't work. So, you know, it's nice to look at your photos and just think, is there just some little thing I can do? And actually, I would recommend it here as well, on the pathway. And just got to brighten this up just to make it go a little quicker. And maybe I brightened it a little too much. Nah, I don't know. It's probably okay. Something like that. And, you know, I feel like it does pull me in a little bit more now. You don't want to overdo the brightness because of the sun in the background. You kind of want to be drawn toward that. But I also don't want to feel like I'm stumbling around in the dark. So wonderful, wonderful photos, Glenn. Let's look at Stuart here. All right. And do you notice with both of these photos the similar sort of composition, where we've got a main object off to the left, or off center anyways, off to the left, and then we've got, you know, points of interest in the background. So similar kind of composition here, and I like this, you know, when you're capturing a scene, whether it's nature or cityscape or whatever, and you can get one large object that is a point of interest, and we immediately go to that object and go, oh, that's a cool tree, or that's a cool monument, or whatever. But then there is more to explore in the photo. We can move around. We can look at the different rocks. We can scan the background. You know, we can look at the sky and all that sort of thing. So I like this composition, or this idea of having, you know, one thing, one large thing in the photo, and then more to explore. And I'm a little surprised that this photo seems so sharp all the way through. And, you know, again, I'm not going to zoom in and nitpick over how sharp it is, but you're at f4 and you're at 40 millimeters. I would have expected, you know, the background to be a little more blurry, but we seem to have decent consistency through the photo. Part of the reason is, I think, because you are standing back from the scene so much, so again, the one principle of getting things out, getting the background out of focus, is to get closer to your main subject. But it's kind of like, you know, you're not that close to anything in here, so a lot more of it will stay in focus. And I'm not suggesting you should have had a blurry background. I'm just commenting because we had started off talking about aperture and background blur. So yeah, and there's so much to explore in this photo. So I think what might make this better is to explore this scene in different light. Explore the scene in bright, like afternoon sunlight, where you are going to get some bright spots and deep shadows. Explore this at sunrise or sunset. If possible, if you live anywhere near here, go back to this location at different times of day, in different weather, and, you know, capture it as much as you can. And partially, I'm just thinking that the light is a little bit flat because it's overcast. So the light is a little bit flat on the city, and maybe a little more contrast with the light would be nice, but maybe not. That's why I suggest doing it, because you might not actually like the way it looks in other ways. And I would, just for the fun of it, I was thinking, what would cropping it do? So imagine you wanted to post this on Instagram and you wanted to go with the square format. You know, if you did something like that, I think that would still be kind of neat, although it's unfortunate that we lost the clock tower in the background. So, you know, maybe square format isn't the best for this. Maybe an 8x10 format is better for this. And one reason I recommend that is just because it seems as though there is stuff on the right-hand side of your photo that is not as important. I don't know, maybe it is. Yeah, okay, keep it. Also, what if we got rid of a little bit of the sky? And so we went with, went with something like this. It's not panoramic, but it's a little bit more, it's more like a widescreen TV now. It's more cinematic, and I think that might actually be good. So there we go, just play around with the cropping. And then I thought, I wonder, the same thing for this photo, if we attempted the 8x10 crop. I like to play with cropping and see how it changes the feel of the photo. And the idea is to, no, you know what? I almost want to make it like this, because you cut into the left side of the circle. And if it's, my thought is if something is going to be cut off in your photo, actually that would be a little bit of tip here, is to try to be careful not to cut things off. So the tree comes and touches the edge there. If there was just a tiny bit more breathing space there, that would be nice. And then it's perfectly fine that you cut into this side of the circle over here. And then that's why I cropped in a little bit more, because it's like, if you're going to crop in a little bit, just kind of go all the way. Now, again, you may not like the way I've cropped this. I'm just kind of experimenting and seeing how it would change. Again, we can try the square format and, see what you think about that. Of course, you lose a little bit of the hills in the background if we do that, so maybe you don't want to. I do like the light in this photo. And again, you could experiment by coming back at different times of day. It's nice and vibrant. It is not as flat looking as the photo here. So, just in terms of acquiring a taste for light, I really like that shot of the tree. So thank you for sending those in, Stuart. And I love this. I love getting all these photos from people. So keep it up. Keep sending them in if you've sent one batch in, especially if I give you a tip and you actually think it's a good idea and then you try it. I would love to see you send it in again. That would be great. So we've got a handful of photos from Tabitha here, and let's see what we've got. Whenever I see movement, the first thing I want to do is see, like, is it blurry? And so, okay, we got somebody running down the hill, or at least walking down the hill. It looks like they're running. I think from I like the gesture in this photo between the dress and the arms out and whatnot. You feel the movement of this photo. So I really like that. And it was a quick enough shutter speed to freeze the action. So she is at 85 millimeters and with her lens, her focal length, and is at f2.8. So I'm not sure what kind of lens or camera she's using, but although I think I could figure that out, maybe. It is a Canon. Okay, and what is the lens? And I don't know what the range of the lens is. Oh, an 85 millimeter 1.8 lens. I have one of these for my Nikon camera, which I don't use a whole lot anymore, but I love that lens. Yeah, so it allows the aperture to open a lot more, which was really good because you're in the forest and it's dim. And so opening that aperture up more, it's so great to have a 50 millimeter lens or an 85 or whatever that will open up to f1.8 and allow you to bring in so much more light, thus allowing you to have a faster shutter speed and capture motion like this. I'm just curious about the crop, and there's a couple of different ways that we could go with this. One is that we can sort of move it down like that, and then because she's at the top of the frame and she's higher up in the frame, it's a little bit more like she's floating. And of course she's running down a hill, so she kind of is floating. And then we've got more room at the bottom, so it gives the sort of feeling of floating. I have been studying design lately and cinematography, even though I'm really not into video and that kind of thing, because I want to learn principles of design and carry them over to photography. And when you place an object higher up in the frame, it does give the feeling of floating, especially when they kind of are floating. And so I would recommend a crop like this to make the photo even stronger. And okay, so we have got, I love the scene here. It's bright, it's warm. We've got the background out of focus. Of course, you have committed a terrible sin here by cutting off her hands. So personally, I don't care about this, but it is a thing among photographers that you do not want to cut into people's joints. So I can't really draw a person very well. That's another thing that I want to learn how to do is draw, and I just haven't got there yet. I am so sorry to this person that I am drawing. I promise I won't bring you to life. Whoops, so we got a big leg, we got whatever. So you don't really want to cut through the, generally speaking, you don't want to cut through the ankles. You don't really want to cut through the knees, and you don't really want to cut through hands or elbows if possible. You want to cut somewhere in between there. So let's undo that and say, generally speaking, it's more pleasing if, I try not to cut through shins, but if you cut through the thighs or you cut through the shoulders or something like that, and you try and keep the other limbs away from the guillotine. So what could we do? Now, like I said, I don't care. It doesn't really bother me that much. I just don't care. I can handle the chaos of you know, cropping through a limb. But what you could do is just bring your frame in a little bit like that. And then, now, I feel like this loses something. I actually don't like this as much. I really feel like it should be like this. It would just be kind of sort of nice if you didn't cut through the hands. Again, if it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother me. And, you know, to anybody it does bother, it's not their picture. So keep that in mind and do what you will with that advice. But yeah, I love nice warm picture. Now, you can, of course, see that there is a little bit of overexposure because there is some sun hitting her. Now, let me just first say, I love this backlight, light that is coming from behind a person, and this seems to be coming from behind and kind of to the side. And you can see how it traces around her arm over here. It really helps her pop against the background. It's tracing her hair, but it does get a little overexposed here. This often happens with people with blonde hair or light-colored hair in general, or no hair and light-colored skin. You'll often get some overexposure there. I don't know whether you've already edited this photo, but if we bring the highlight slider down, no, I think that spot, watch how the spot isn't really going to change all that much. Yeah, it's definitely overexposed and it's just blown right into whiteness. Again, maybe shooting raw for circumstances like this would be helpful to you. But this is still a great photo. I mean, that's something you want to try and avoid, but believe me, it happens to me all the time, and it happens to every photographer where this is what we want and this is what we got. I love the light in this photo. So first of all, you know, we're looking at the focus here, and we see that basically the toy is in focus and the hand is in focus. So if there's a bit of a story going on in this photo, like he's crawling toward the toy, it's not so bad that the hand is in focus and the toy is in focus. It really makes us focus on those things and go, oh, I see what he's up to. He's reaching for the toy. I mean, if his face would have been in focus, that might have been better. On the other hand, it would have left the toy and his hand a little bit out of focus and may have lost the story of what's going on in the photo. So I love the light, and I love, you know, the gesture that you captured. We see the catch lights in the eyes, and we see the at least very close to Rembrandt Light. So let me explain Rembrandt Light really quickly. It's basically light that's coming from the side, but it's also kind of coming from above a little bit. And so, first of all, it's named after Rembrandt the painter because he used this kind of light in his portraits so often. So the light is kind of coming from up here. So it's from the side and it's up top. This is probably coming from a window, I'm guessing. And what happens is one side of the face gets lit and the other side is in shadow. So this side is lit, this side is in shadow, but a little bit of light breaks over the nose here and gives us this triangle of light under the eye. And I am obsessed with this kind of lighting. I just love it. I will take a picture of anyone, anything. I even find like dinosaur statues or animal statues and stuff and wait until the sun is in just the right spot that it creates something close to this Rembrandt cross light. across the face. So I love this. You know, it's fairly soft light that we got here. It's somewhere between soft and hard light. It's not a super crisp shadow, so nice job there. Once you're used to seeing light, now just look at the light in these two photos. Very different light, right? That is like Rembrandt artistic light. This is just basically something like front light hitting the side of his face. And the light itself isn't so interesting. Of course, what's cool about this photo is that he's toppling the tower. So between these two photos here, we've got a story, you know, we've got a scene here, a part of a story, and we've got the story unfolding. What I love is when you can get three shots to the story. So I don't know what that would have been in this circumstance, but I love seeing a series of three, sometimes four. Beyond that, I think it starts to get a little much, but I love like a series of three. This is nice with the candles here, and what I'm going to recommend is a slight bit of a crop. And okay, so it feels like the scene is tilted a little bit. So on the one hand, I'm going to do this, and that may have actually gone too far. Something a little more like that. Sometimes if the angle is a slight bit wonky, it can make it hard to get things perfectly straight. But anyways, okay, so I just sort of thought maybe straightening it a little bit. And then also a different crop, especially, so of course I'm thinking like, oh, put this on Instagram and go with something like that. And then what we end up with here is it's very clear that the focus is right in about here, almost in the middle of your frame. And it gives us some ability to it gives us some movement. We can move into the frame, skimming over the blurry stuff, settling our eyes here for a moment, and then leaving the frame. And the fact that it goes into darkness makes me kind of wonder, you know, where is this? What's going on back there? It adds a little bit of mystery to the photo. So I think, you know, personally, I think that the crop makes it somewhat stronger of a photo. But good job on that, because it can certainly be a little bit tricky to capture candlelight nicely. And I would recommend for those of you who understand exposure compensation or the plus minus button to play around with that. And that will help you in these tricky lighting situations, because, you know, this photo could have easily have been overexposed. You know, it could have been, you know, more like that or something. And, you know, it could have also ended up way too dark for some reason. And I'd say that this is pretty good exposure though. Okay, well, that covers it for this month. I would love to hear from you about what you found helpful in this video. With the last video, a bunch of people chimed in, and so thank you for sending the photos. I loved looking at them. I'm excited to be helping my students, and I'm excited to be giving feedback to people who have found me on the internet, reading my articles or watching my videos or whatever. And I do these, like I said, longer versions of these videos for my students, and I am willing to do them for you as well. I don't have a web page set up for it, but I'll get one eventually. You can always contact me personally. So 95 Canadian dollars will get you your own personal video like this. You can send me 20, 30, 40 photos. You can get in touch with me in advance and say, I want help. You know, tell me what your goal is, what you're hoping to learn, or how you want to improve. Maybe you want to put together a portfolio. Maybe you want to have me look at an entire family photo shoot and give you feedback on the whole shoot, or a wedding, or who knows what, your wildlife photography, whatever it may be. You know, I'd love to do that for you. The great part about Canadian dollars is that if you're American, and probably if you're European, probably in many places of the world, it's to your benefit to pay in Canadian dollars. If I charge you 95 American, Canadians would have to pay a lot more because our dollar is worth less. So if you are paying in American, or if you're American and you're translating the currency, it's actually going to be a better deal for you than $95. But I think if you know you want feedback, I think I can really help you grow and help get you to the next level, and we can talk about what that is for you. And in the meantime, just let me know how you're enjoying the stuff that I'm putting out. Thanks so much for watching.